All right, let's get into it. Today, we're jumping into what I think is one of the most exciting parts of any data adventure, model execution. Seriously, this is where all that planning, all that prep work, it finally turns into something real, something that actually works. So yeah, let's dive in.
This quote from our source material just hits the nail on the head. It perfectly sets the scene, right? We're not just shuffling clues or drawing up theories on a whiteboard anymore. Now, we're the data detective, out in the field, literally building the tool that's going to help us crack the whole case.
So what exactly is model execution? Well, to put it simply, it's the hands-on, get your hands dirty building phase. Think about it like this. If you've spent weeks designing the blueprints for a robot, this is the moment you actually pick up the tools and start bolting it together. It's all about bringing that plan to life.
But before our model can go out and solve any problems, it has to learn. It needs an education. And that brings us to its very first stop, the classroom. This is where we're going to train this digital brain. So what's the model's textbook? It's something we call training data. This is a specially picked set of information that the model just pores over, again and again, looking for patterns, seeing how things connect, finding all the little trends. This is how it learns the basics before we dare ask it to do anything complicated.
Okay, this slide is super important for understanding how this all works. On the left, you've got the training data. Think of these as the practice problems in the back of the textbook. The model gets to see the questions and the answers, so it can learn how to connect the dots. But then on the right, you have the test data. This is the final exam. It's a bunch of brand new questions the model has never, ever seen before. And this is how we find out if it actually understands the subject or if it just memorized the homework.
All right, so our model has been to the classroom, it's studied hard, now it's time to head into the workshop. This is where we do the real hands-on building, the fine-tuning, and of course, the testing.
This whole process follows a really clear roadmap, a step-by-step guide. We've already talked about creating our training data and then setting aside that all-important test data. So now we're going to get into the really good stuff. Building the model, checking its work, and finally, setting it loose on the real world.
So step 3, build and fit. Honestly, this is where the magic really happens. Here, we use these powerful algorithms. You can think of them as super complex recipes or instructions to shape and tune the model based on all that training data we fed it. This is the step that officially makes our model smart.
Which, of course, leads us to the biggest question of all. We've built this thing, it seems smart, but is it reliable? Is it accurate? I mean, how do we really know if it's any good at its job?
Well, we give it a report card. We check for a few key things. We measure its accuracy, how often it's right, and its error rate, how often it's wrong. We look at its confidence, and then we check its lift, which is a really cool way of asking, is this thing actually better than just random guessing? For instance, if guessing gets you 1% of fraud cases, but your model gets 10%, that's a huge lift. And finally, and this is so important, we ask, is it comprehensible? Can we, as the humans in charge, actually understand why it's making the decisions it's making? Because in some fields, a black box that just spits out answers is a really big problem.
Okay, so once our model passes its final exams with flying colors, it's ready for graduation. It's time for the launch, where we release it out into the real world to start making a real impact.
This final step is called deployment. And to go back to our analogy, this is that awesome moment where you open the workshop doors and send your fully built robot out into the world to do the job it was designed for. This is when the model stops being a science project and starts making actual real-world decisions.
And that's exactly why this phase is so absolutely critical. I mean, without execution, a data model is nothing more than a clever idea on a piece of paper. This is the phase that turns that abstract plan into a tangible, useful tool that can solve real problems. Of course, data detectives aren't doing all this with just a notepad. They have an entire toolkit of powerful software and languages. You're looking at some of the heavy hitters right here. Python and R are famous for their massive libraries, and something like Apache Spark is an absolute beast when you're dealing with gigantic data sets. These are the real-world tools of the trade.
So let's just zoom out for a second and recap the whole journey of our data detective, just so we can see how this all fits into the bigger picture. This timeline really shows how it all builds on itself. Model execution is that crucial fourth phase. It's the payoff for everything we did before it, finding the problem back in discovery, cleaning up all the messy data during prep, and then picking the right strategy and planning. This is the moment the solution actually gets built. So, if you're going to take anything away from this, here's your cheat sheet. Model execution is phase 4.
Training data is the teacher, test data is the final exam, assessment is the report card, and deployment, well, that's when our model finally gets a real job.
And that brings us to the end, but it leaves us with a really fascinating final question to chew on. The model is built, it's out there on the world, doing its thing. But the world is always changing, right? New data comes in, trends shift. So how does a model, once it's built, continue to stay smart and relevant? That sounds like a challenge for another day. Hope this helped you get a handle on what model execution is all about.